Douglas County Board of County Commissioners business meeting. We want to welcome those of you who are with us today in the Douglas County Courthouse, as well as those of you joining us online. I will just pass on a bit of information about how we will run our hybrid meeting. All participants joining us online will be entered into the meeting with their audio muted, meaning the commission and the public will not be able to hear you. Presenters will be unmuted when their agenda item comes up. We ask that all online presenters use good conference call etiquette and mute their line when not speaking and introduce themselves each time they speak. If you have public comment on an agenda item or under regular public comment, if you are here with us in person, please come to the front of the room for that agenda item or for regular public comment, or use the raise your hand function if you're joining us on Zoom. Staff will call on you and unmute you if you are on Zoom. We ask that speakers give their name and address for the minutes. We also ask that all speakers keep their comments to 3 minutes. We will give you a 30-second warning, let you know when your time is up, and we may cut the mic if you go over 3 minutes. The county also reserves the right to shut off the microphone and remove any speaker from the meeting if they are vulgar, rude, or inappropriate. A recording of this meeting will be available on our website after the meeting. We will get started tonight with our consent agenda. Would either commissioner like to pull anything from our consent agenda?
No, thank you.
Nope. Do we have anyone joining us in the courthouse who would like to pull something from the consent agenda for discussion? Do we have anyone online who'd like to pull anything from the consent agenda? Okay.
This is Commissioner Reed. I move to approve today's consent agenda item 1.1 through 1.5.
Second.
All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We will move on to general public comment. Do we have anyone here in the courthouse for general public comment? Please come on up. And when you get there, press the button on the mic so the light turns green.
All right. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Paul DeGeorge. I live here in Lawrence, and my wife Meredith Moore and I are the owners of Wonder Fair, a retail shop on Massachusetts Street here in downtown Lawrence. And I'm here today as a member of Justice Matters and on behalf of 20 other local businesses to share our support for the Built for Zero resolution adopted in May and for our county's commitment to end chronic homelessness by January 2023. I know that in these types of forums, when small business owners come forward, it's often to support tax incentives or rezoning initiatives or some other initiative that might help spur economic development. But I'm here to communicate that we believe that homelessness is a problem that is solvable and that addressing chronic homelessness with compassionate and holistic solutions is good for our local businesses. Prioritizing public health, as this commission has done repeatedly during the pandemic, is good policy for our small business community. This is what keeps our downtown safe and thriving and will ensure that it remains one of the largest economic drivers within Douglas County. While the upfront cost of ending homelessness may be high, we have an unprecedented opportunity to receive federal funding to pay for much of this new infrastructure through the American Rescue Plan Act. Now's the time to get this done in Douglas County, especially as emergency eviction moratoriums begin expiring and will likely cause an increase in the number of people experiencing homelessness. We need a comprehensive plan to end homelessness in our community instead of continuing to just manage it. Last week, you all approved funding for a study by the KU Public Partnerships and Research that will help form a plan. We're excited about this, but concerned that the study will only provide a needs assessment, which is not the same as a comprehensive plan to end homelessness. I'd like to know who's going to take the lead on creating that plan using the recommendations from the study. Time is always of the essence, but more so now because of this incredible funding opportunity. I urge you to do everything we can in this moment to ensure that our community remains healthy, safe, and thriving long into the future by solving this issue of chronic homelessness. I have all of the 20 businesses assigned that have signed this statement of support. Can I pass that on to you guys? Thanks so much.
Thank you very much and very timely, given our upcoming conversation about ARPA funding this evening. Do we have anyone else for general public comment?
Good evening. My name is Rose Schmidt, and tonight I am here as a spokesman for Justice Matters. As you just heard from Paul DeGeorge, numerous members of particularly the downtown community, are very interested in seeing homelessness addressed. We talked with a number of businessmen over the course of the summer and found almost universal concern and an expressed wish that homelessness could be addressed quickly and in a way that would make Lawrence a much more desirable city to live and work in. So we appreciate what you've done so far in terms of the joint statement with the mayor of Lawrence, but we implore you to continue that support, and we hope to soon find ourselves a city that puts ending homelessness over managing homelessness. Thank you.
I take it this is on any subject. You said general.
This is general public comment. If you have public comment on a specific agenda item, we ask that you wait for that agenda item. But if this is just general, this is our open time.
My name is Linda Campbell. I live at 4124 Wimbledon Drive here in Lawrence. I have lived in Lawrence all my life. I love the memories of growing up in this town where we were free to be happy and prosper. There is an air quality meter that is provided by OSHA for employers to measure air quality and be sure that their employees are not breathing air that would harm their health. Surely, if I have seen the scientists demonstrate the unsafe air that you are breathing behind your mask, then surely you have informed yourself as to the quality of the air you are breathing behind that mask you're wearing. Sad enough that you choose to believe the lie that the mask keeps you safe when it is making you ill. But child abuse, when you force an unclean cloth mask across a child's face and force them to breathe in air all day that would not pass OSHA standards for a workplace. Just think about the polluted air underneath these disgusting, dirty masks you're forcing the beautiful children of Douglas County to wear 8 hours a day. I know you're not listening to me, but I pray that those who are watching and listening will join me in protesting mandates that are turning our country into another socialist country. Please, fellow citizens, wake up and save this beautiful country of ours. Thank you.
My name is Sue Herring. I'm at 5225 Harvard Road here in Lawrence. I'm following up with Linda's comments in the same vein. My points tonight are not directed so much to you because I feel like the three of you completely ignore us and have an agenda of your own that does our public no good at all. I'm here tonight to talk to the general audience with the idea of I'm going to do two things. I'm going to broaden their perspective, and then I'm going to sharpen their focus. Where I want to broaden their perspective is to appeal to those of you who sense there's something wrong, that we are losing our freedoms, and to let you know that several of us for the last several weeks have been on a corner in front of the school administrative offices, 497's administrative offices on McDonald Road, waving flags, standing for our country, standing for freedom. And that we are getting such a positive response, a hugely positive response from the people driving, from people who take a minute to park their cars and come say, thank you. We didn't know there was anyone else. There are plenty of us. That's where the perspective needs to be broadened. Now, as to sharpening our focus, I want to do that right on the children where Linda left off. In the previous commission meeting that I attended, there were remarks made in the paper and online later. And one of the three of you used that opportunity to mention that they are, or this person is, a descendant of a Holocaust survivor. Trying to gain traction like that is phony and false when that same person is perfectly willing to send small
You have
children
30 seconds left.
every day to school with what amounts to a gas chamber on their face.
Do we have anyone else here in the courthouse for general public comment? Okay, do we have anyone online for general public comment? We will move on to our regular agenda, starting with item 3.1, Planning Department. Consider a text amendment TA 20-00002 to the subdivision regulations regarding housing costs.
Thank you, Commissioners. Kyle Kobe from Lawrence Douglas County Planning is joining the online panel. Kyle?
Thank you very much. Kyle Kobe with Planning. So the item before you this evening is consideration of a text amendment to the subdivision regulations. This text amendment was initiated by the City Commission in February of 2018 and came out of discussions by the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. The goal being to examine potential code changes to reduce the cost of housing by 5% in the City of Lawrence. The initiation of this text amendment identified 3 subjects within the Land Development Code and subdivision regulations. First being street tree spacing standards, second being plat studies requirements, specifically traffic impact studies and downstream sanitary sewer analysis, and the third being sidewalk installation timing. The item was heard by the Affordable Housing Advisory Board on May 11th of 2020 and August 10th of 2020. Planning Commission heard it on January 27th of 2021, and the City Commission on August 17th and September 7th. The City Commission voted 4-1 to adopt the proposed changes. The proposed changes to the subdivision regulations pertain to properties within the City of Lawrence. However, since the subdivision regulations are jointly adopted by the city and the county, any change requires both city and county governing body approval. I want to cover each one of the topics just briefly, and afterwards, I'd of course be happy to answer any questions you might have. Street tree spacing requirements were one of the areas identified for examination. The current standard requires 1 tree per every 40 feet of street frontage. As outlined in the staff report and attachments, when looking at the impact of the modified street tree requirement, the cost savings did not seem to outweigh the cumulative loss that would occur through a reduction in tree coverage across the city. This time, it does not appear that the modification will do much to address the stated goal of reducing housing costs by 5% and may not align with other values to the community associated with street trees. The second topic pertains to studies required at the time of platting, those being traffic impact studies and downstream sanitary sewer analysis. The purpose of the traffic study is to evaluate the impact a proposed development will have on transportation infrastructure and identify if the development triggers a need for right-of-way improvements like a traffic signal or turning lane. The purpose of the downstream sanitary sewer analysis is to evaluate the impact a proposed development would have on the wastewater infrastructure. As discussed in the staff report and the attachments, the financial impact that these studies have on development when examined on a per lot basis were relatively minor. These studies, when required, are important tools for assessing the impact that development would have on public infrastructure. In addition, alternatives and waivers to these studies are available to applicants. No changes are being recommended to these standards at this time. As far as sidewalks, the proposed changes to the sidewalk standards discussed in the staff report pertain specifically to the timing of sidewalk installation for properties in the City of Lawrence. The intent of the proposed changes is to provide flexibility to property owners and developers on when sidewalks must be installed, while preserving high-quality pedestrian access and connectivity. Currently, sidewalks are required to be installed concurrently with street or road infrastructure. Concerns were raised regarding the damage that occurs to sidewalks as a result, since sidewalks are in place prior to construction on the lots. The main change from the current standards is to allow for projects that only require a major or minor subdivision to defer sidewalk installation up to 2 years. However, as properties are developed, sidewalks will still be required prior to final building inspection. By and large, this option is likely to apply mainly to detached dwelling and other similar uses. Commercial, industrial, and other non-residential development that require sidewalk installation would be required to complete said installation as part of their regular development review processes. In conclusion, staff is not recommending any changes to street tree spacing, traffic impact study, or downstream sanitary sewer analysis requirements. Staff does recommend approval of the proposed changes to sidewalk installation timing requirements as shown in the joint ordinance resolution based on the findings presented in the staff report. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. We'll open it up to questions from commissioners. Okay, we will open it up to questions from the public. Do we have anyone here at the courthouse with questions or comment on this item? Do we have anyone online with public comment on this item? Okay, we'll bring it back to commissioners for discussion.
I might discuss this a little bit, having served on the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and on the Planning Commission, so I've seen this one a lot. I'm sure the other commissioners watched the Planning Commission meeting and the City Commission meeting that were provided. Thank you for providing those, Kyle. That's very helpful for us. So we don't have quite the number of questions that Planning Commission has. I think that was about an hour and a half. And really in this one, I feel like this is mostly a city. It applies to subdivisions for us, but it's mostly city. I thought the city commissioners did a good job of expressing their concerns and would echo their concerns around giving staff the ability to be more flexible and more creative when they're looking at code changes that will help us reduce the cost of housing in Douglas County. And so in that way, I just want to reiterate that again. But I feel confident voting the same way that the city commission did on this one.
This is Commissioner Reed here. I appreciate that perspective, Commissioner Kelly, and I tend to agree. And I think also this is a good prompt for me as a current county commissioner serving on the Affordable Housing Advisory Board to circle back to this conversation with the current board membership and look at whether or not there are other land development code things in the city that that maybe are new issues to address or other opportunities, since this is sort of a meandering pathway of the last couple of years to get to this decision point. For me, when reading through this document and watching those videos, is a reminder for me that we can maybe there's some fresh ideas for AHAB to discuss with city and county staff about and the planning commission about other code change opportunities that can really make an impact on the affordability of housing.
Yeah, I might just add one more thing on this one, and that this is not to dismiss that, especially the work that the home builders did to try to identify some of these possibilities to lower the cost of housing in Douglas County was not important. I think it is. I think we will continue to sort of sharpen our focus to see if we can find ways to do it. We've got to find bigger things than this. And I think that's really what hit me when I was on the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and we discussed it. While, you know, this isn't getting maybe the bang for the buck that we hoped for, I think it highlights that there's still plenty of work to do here, and we got to stay focused on it. So if it's all right with other commissioners, I'll go ahead and make the motion. And I'll make the motion to approve text amendment TA 20000002 to the subdivision regulations pertaining to the timing requirements for sidewalk installation, approving joint ordinance 9833, resolution 21-37.
Second.
All of those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We will move on to item 3.2, zoning and codes. Consider approving Home Rule Resolution 2192, sale and use of fireworks.
Thank you, commissioners. We'll be moving into the panel. Staff from zoning and codes who will be presenting this item. This is a item you heard earlier this year that has been brought back before the commission. I think is Dre making the presentation? If the folks from zoning and codes making the presentation could come off mute and, oh, thanks, Tanya. I'll turn it over to you, Tanya.
Hi, guys. Tanya Voigt, zoning director here at Douglas County. I think Dre is working on logging on. I heard some crashes and some things happening in the background, so I think he's getting ready to come on. So we're here tonight to discuss the fireworks stand regulation amendments. We were previously here a couple months ago, and when we started hearing feedback from the firework vendors, we decided we needed to kind of touch base, start over, have another meeting with the fireworks vendors, have a special meeting with them. We wanted to work with Consolidated Fire District Number 1, so we had a meeting with Chief Baxter. We have coordinated also with the Sheriff's Office and all of the township fire departments to verify that they are okay with the draft regulations and just have more conversation around it, make some changes based on those conversations, and some things we've just chosen not to change. Dre, I think, is going to be here in just a moment. I don't have his presentation in front of me, and so he should be here.
Looks like he may be having trouble connecting.
I can send him over my way. I'm going to see if he wants to come over. Well, let me see if I can pull up his presentation. Let me see if I can find it.
good to see you, Dre. Just a reminder, you'll want to come off mute when you're ready to give us the presentation.
Perfect, thank you. My microphone just stopped working at my main desk. All right, perfect, here we go. There we go. I believe everything is up and running properly now.
Yep, we've got it, Dre. Thanks.
All right, perfect. So we're going to keep this one short and simple for you guys today. Back in April, we brought this before you guys, and there was a lot of discussion that we needed to have with the fireworks vendors and members of the public. So last month we met with all the vendors and we came to a lot of agreements on a lot of things. And then there was one item that we did not come to a conclusion on, but we can discuss that one towards the end. So today, so we met with Public Works, the Sheriff's Office, and Consolidated Fire District 1. So I believe Chad Voigt, Chief Baxter, and a member from the Sheriff's Department will be on the call today to help answer any questions in the end. So we're going to highlight a few of the proposed amendments that we've been working on. The first one being the prohibited locations. So our first item is on any county-owned property unless sponsored by the, oops, my apologies. We seem to have opened up the wrong version. There we go. So on any county-owned properties, with the exception of designated portions of Lone Star Lake and Wells Overlook Park, unless sponsored by the governing body. And the purpose was this is to negate harmful impacts that fireworks debris have on the county properties. Prohibited fireworks, we have added sky lanterns per the recommendation of the fire chief. Many of the calls that relate to this for fires and dangerous items are related to the sky lanterns. So if we can get rid of those, then we can probably prevent some fires in the future. 6-204, we have added some language in regard to the permitting process. Currently, staff are reviewing all the items that go into permitting these fireworks, such as the staff time it takes to go out to there to review the sites. That is beforehand and during the fireworks sales. Staff are redoing the entire application. So we are creating a packet. We will be printing off paperwork documents, large posters using the plotter, and all of that stuff costs money and resources. And so we are accumulating all of that. We are taking the financial expenditures of Public Works into consideration. So we are estimating that final cost of firework fees will be anywhere from $500 to $1,000. And then we are also changing the submission window from June 1st through June 25th to April 1st through June 7th. This will give us a lot more time to work and print off all those documents. Printing on the plotter, it can take some time. It's big and expensive. And when Public Works is using it, it can be backed up for hours or days. One of the issues that Chief Baxter saw during inspections this year was that some of the fireworks stands had their fire extinguishers located with some of the product. In an emergency, that would be very difficult to find when there's a fire going on and you can't find the fire extinguisher because it's sitting behind a large stack of fireworks. And then the other one is that we have included a public notice requirement for all special event permits, temporary business uses, conditional use permits. We all require neighbor notification. So this will bring that more into alignment with that.
We have set 1,000-foot radius, which is a lot smaller than the half mile for all the other uses though. And then the one item that fireworks vendors and staff were unable to come to a conclusion on was the expansion of sale and discharge dates. The fireworks vendors have expressed an interest in additional sales dates. They said it would create more tax revenue for the county and more revenue for themselves. But staff have received no general public expression for expanded sales dates or discharge dates. Staff believe that this would be an item that would require a lot of research, a lot of public outreach, and a lot of discussion. And that's all we have for you guys today.
Thank you. I will open this up to questions from commissioners.
This is Commissioner Reed here. Thanks so much for that overview, Dre, and everything included in the packet. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the fee schedule and the conversations around that and how that's being communicated to vendors, like the expectation of what range the fees might land in? Because 500 to 1,000 is pretty significant range. So some criteria around that would be helpful to understand.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you're aware of the cost associated with using a plotter. The plotter is what we use to make all of our giant maps. So one of the criteria in the regulations is that they need to have a 3x3 sign that has the posting of the rules. And so we would be printing off the rules for everybody on that 3x3 paper using the plotter. We take into consideration the amount of dollars that Public Works is using for cleanup efforts afterwards. And this could vary depending on if Public Works decides to contract out the cleanup of Lone Star Lake and Wells Overlook. So that cost for Public Works could range anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000. So we're trying to recoup some of that revenue. It's the staff time that the fire department takes into account when they have to drive all over the county in their fire trucks. In case there's an emergency somewhere, they have to have the fire truck with them. And then just the general staff time of zoning and codes to review all the applications, make sure everything is met. We have to take time to print off all the documents, additional documents that they need to hang. We have to laminate items. So it's a lot of stuff that's going to go into this. So we're still trying to calculate all the costs.
Jay, I appreciate all of the background on what the costs, like what will go into the cost. And when we had that earlier discussion in April, it sounded like most of the vendors were very willing to see those costs kind of increase because they recognize that they haven't in quite a while. But has there been much of an ongoing dialogue with vendors about when there might be a specific cost that they can consider? Since, as Commissioner Reed mentioned, 500 to 1,000, that could be a pretty big range for folks to start thinking about budgeting for this coming year.
Correct. So we did meet with all the vendors and we did not hammer down a cost range, but most of the vendors did show support for increased cost. I have done a small comparison of other communities around us for what their costs are. And there are multiple communities that their firework vendor cost is $1,000.
Dre, this is Sarah. Could you give us an approximate timeline as to when you will have that fee set?
I would probably defer that one to Tanya because we want to get that all done with the general zoning and codes fee schedule all at the same time.
Can you move her over? I'm going to move Tanya over. Yeah, sorry about that.
Hi there, Tanya Voigt. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Oh, not now. Now you're muted.
Dre is correct that currently we've been working on updating our zoning fees, which would include anything from special events to temporary business use permits to conditional use permits. And the fireworks permit would just be lumped into and included in that new fee schedule. We'd like to have that to you in fall. Probably, I guess we're kind of going into fall right now. So we could say maybe by early January. And then when that happens, we'd be really happy to speak with the vendors about it, let them know of the public meeting, because you guys would need to approve that fee schedule so that we can have feedback that everyone's in agreement on the fee. And if there is a disagreement, then obviously we could talk about that in the public meeting as well.
Great, thank you. Additional questions?
Tanya and Dre, thanks for this report and for doing all the work with our vendors. Could you talk, I'm going to switch this a little bit, maybe to the second part of it, which was the sale dates and maybe what you're thinking. It seems like in the packet, you suggested that we would need to do quite a bit of public outreach on this and just how you're thinking that would happen. I'm sure there are a lot of differing opinions when it comes to fireworks use. How would you plan to collect that community feedback?
So we have multiple tools at our disposal. On our zoning and codes page, we do try to upload whenever there's new regulations being proposed. During our day-to-day activities, we do collect emails of every property owner that does contact our office. And then we do work with the planning office as well. So between those avenues, we could publish an article in the paper, and we could do social media blasts as well to try to get as much feedback as possible. This is a subject that's very polarizing. Our office hears the negative side of things almost exclusively. So it's something that we would want to have a lot more information on about what the public thinks, and then what the other departments within our organization would require in order to make that happen.
Thank you. With no other questions from commissioners, we will open this item up for public comment. Do we have anyone here with us in the courthouse for public comment?
Yes, my name is Larry Bartz, and I live at 1819 East 1200 Road. I operate Bartz Fireworks. I have 3 tents around Douglas County. And first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for putting it off till after our season. And thank Tanya Boyd and Dre for getting us together, because we as a team can make a big difference. So, there was just a couple things that I particularly was interested in. Number one, I would like to have it worded in there somehow to where you guys, the 3 commissioners, are the ones that raise the fee, that they just can't go in and raise the fee if they decide to do that. So that was one of my things. And I don't know if that's the way it was worded or whatever, but my interpretation of the way it was worded was that they could just go in and raise the fee. We don't mind. As a general rule, all the fireworks people don't mind raising the fee. I mean, it's been that price for quite a while. So, it's time. And so I don't have really a problem with that. Other than that, we're in pretty much agreement with Tanya and Dre on all the stuff. Everything else seemed to work out pretty good. The only one of my concerns is the fact that in 30 years that I've been in this business, here in Douglas County. I've never had to send out a letter to anybody, and it's going to be costly. I mean, it'll cost us a little bit to do that, especially if we have to send them certified mail. I don't know if that's the case. Tanya, is that the case, or no? It's not certified. It's just regular mail. So that's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. So other than that, I really don't have any. Does any of the commissioners have any questions?
We don't, but I see Tanya wanting to jump in and answer some of your questions.
I just wanted to clarify that the list is certified from the clerk's office, but the mail does not need to be mailed certified, not each letter. So just regular mail, but the list will be a certified list from the county clerk's office.
Okay. The only other thing is out at Lone Star, you know, I think we need to make the people responsible, the ones that are doing it. Okay, so I don't mind helping pay for it or whatever, but you know, ultimately it's got to be the people out there that have to deal with it all the time. They deal with it every weekend. They're out there picking up trash every weekend, not just 4th of July. And I mean, it was a mess out there because I was out there helping pick it up. So I mean, I even offered to take some barrels out there. One of the things that I wanted to try to get them to put some receptacles out there, more receptacles, wherever they're going to do it. And I agree with the fact that they need to limit where they can shoot them off. I mean, it was a mess. And I was down in the culvert trying to pull that stuff out of there, and it was a mess. So I do agree with that. And we need to limit fireworks in the general area of the lake and limit it to, you know, up by the camping area or whatever they determine in the parking lot areas. So, but anyway, that was all I had. Thank you very much for your patience with us, and thanks Tanya and Dre. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else here in the courthouse for public comment on this item?
Good evening. My name is Jeremy Long. My family and I, we've been selling fireworks for over 20 years south of town here. And I'd like to kind of echo some of what Larry said. This was a very constructive process, and I appreciate what Tanya and Dre have done throughout this whole process. Just a couple things I would like to hit on. As far as the permit fee increasing, it's currently 125, I believe. I was a little sticker shocked when he said 500 to 1,000. I was hoping the high end would be 500, just because if you're a smaller operation, that cuts into a lot of your profit at the end of the day, the higher it is. Furthermore, in all the discussions, I was a proponent of at least a couple more sales days. That was one way I viewed, and I think some of the other vendors viewed, to offset the higher permit fees, the cost of sending out the mailers to all the neighboring people. I can say from personal experience, I have a stand down in Franklin County where we're allowed to sell from the 27th through the 5th. And while there might be some off chance that people do set them off earlier than the set dates, like let's say we increase the sales days to the 29th and the 30th, but only allowed people to shoot them from the 1st through the 4th. There might be some increased shooting early, but I think mainly what you'll have is what I see down there, which is people coming in to purchase for their shows to avoid the crowd when they have a larger selection, or if they have more questions and want education, if you will, on what certain products do. When you're limited to such a narrow window to sell, it kind of becomes a madhouse sometimes, and either people can't find what they want, or they can't ask the questions they need if they're new to setting off fireworks. So I would strongly encourage more sales days, and I would hope that maybe we try to find some savings in raising the permit fee. I'm okay with raising it, but jumping from 125 to 1,000 is kind of steep, especially in one jump. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lyric Bartz, and my husband's already touched on a couple things. I have a few more questions. On page 22, it says on-site security, and it says the overnight temporary lodging must be identified on site plan. My problem is requires waste approval from Lawrence Douglas County Health Department. We use self-contained waste, as in porta potties, and so there is no problem with waste disposal. And our site plan does identify most of everything that's on there, but our campers are used for heat relief, and that's all. It's just so if anybody gets overheated, they can get into the air conditioning. So that is, like I say, that's on page 22. And then on page 24, it says public notice, the operator should send public notice to all property owners within a 1,000-foot radius. And I need a clarification. Does that mean if you have 150 acres, surely we're not talking about 1,000 feet from the edge of that 150 acres? Anyone know that? Can we clarify that in any way?
Yeah, so I can address, I believe, both of those concerns. So whenever we have individuals.
Okay, before we do that, let's gather all of the questions and then address them
Okay,
at the end.
all right, no problem. Okay, the number 4, also on page 24, the letter itself does make it clear that even that a permit has already been given by the county, but I feel that in the code itself, it could use a little more clarification that the letter is going out to the homeowners, but the homeowners don't have any ability to disallow what the county has already given on a permit. And okay, on page 25, it says, any questions, it is regarding the letter itself. It says, please contact me, giving the vendor's name, with any questions regarding this permitted stand or Douglas County Zoning and Codes Department. I feel like we need to clarify that a little bit because the vendor probably shouldn't be giving code information, that it should, if they're start asking specifics, that probably needs to come from the code enforcement because we might not interpret it exactly the same. So they're free to call us for questions about our stand, but once it goes into code enforcement, that should be clarified that it needs to be addressed to the codes department. We already talked about it doesn't have to be certified letter, and that is great. And the only other thing is we're Bart's Fireworks, not Bart's Brothers Fireworks. So on the map that indicates where we are, I just wanted to clarify that it's a different name.
Thank you. And we'll keep collecting all of the questions and then respond to the public comment when we come back for discussion. Do we have anyone else here in the courthouse? Okay, I do see a hand raised online.
Eric Garrett, you can unmute and provide your public comment.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My name is Eric Garrett, and we have Garrett's Fireworks. It's just east of town. And I want to first off say I appreciate everybody's time and consideration on this. I've learned today I don't think I'd want any of your jobs. So I respect you guys for what you have to do and the decisions that you have to make. I don't have a lot to say because I think pretty much Jeremy touched everything, but I was kind of scared by the word fee schedule because it to me sounded like it was just kind of arbitrary depending on their expenses that year. So I think we need to go with an amount, stick with it. We just need to decide what that is. And I think 500 may be enough, but I also agree with Jeremy that another day or two of sales would help us to recoup some of the losses we have for the increase of the fees and the expense of mailing everybody the notice. And then we did ask Tanya and Dre about a clause within this that would give us some sort of notification if there's any proposed future changes to the zoning so that nothing can slip in without us knowing about it in advance, because we, as you all know, we have to plan a long time to prepare for this, and this almost slipped in on us in I think June, and we need time to kind of come together and talk with everybody about the proposed changes. So if we could just be notified in the future, we would appreciate that. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any additional hands up, so I will bring this back to commissioners for discussion. But I'd like if we could start with some of those questions. And one of the first that I heard was around the who will actually do the approving of fees. And Tanya, I believe that you all are bringing us fees to approve from the commission. Is that correct? Or are you setting the fees through your office?
No, we will not be setting the fees through our office. We will do a study of where we think we are fee-wise to cover costs. We will then bring that before the Board of County Commissioners for approval, and that will have to be adopted by resolution.
Okay, so the commission will be the one approving the fees, and we'll have an opportunity for public comment again before we do that fee approval.
You're correct.
Great. And then I believe there was a question about distance and the 1,000 yards, which Dre, you were about to jump in and answer before I cut you off. I apologize for that.
Oh, no, my apologies. For every property within Douglas County, it is the county stance that you take the perimeter of the property when doing public notices.
Thank you. So we'll just be consistent with other resolutions here. And then I believe the question on the letter was making sure that we have contact information for the vendor as well as for codes. My impression is that that's so that neighbors could contact the vendor for things like hours, information, but with clarity that it's the codes department that they contact for any zoning and codes issues. Does that need to be clarified in the letter? Is that pretty consistent with what we do with other letters? Can you help provide a bit more background on that?
The language in the letter is pretty similar to that we use for notifications for agritourism or conditional use permits. So the language is almost pretty much copied and pasted with a few minor tweaks here and there. And a property owner's complaint or concern will not give them the ability to contest the permit itself.
Thank you. And then I think the last question was just around schedule. So I know that we talked about this originally in April, pushed it back after we heard from folks. Do we regularly review this, or is there something where we can make sure that we have kind of some time before changes would go into effect? What do we do with other resolutions?
This is not an item that we foresee to be changed regularly. The last time this was modified, I believe was 2007 or 2013. So it's something that changes very infrequently, and it is usually customary to meet with staff and then meet with stakeholders before bringing it before the Board of County Commission.
If I could just say a little bit more there too. Dre's correct. It has been a while since we have updated the fireworks code. I don't want us to pin ourselves down, though, that if we got a lot of concerns or something happened, that we wouldn't review it again in the future. So while I think our hope was to do a comprehensive review of the code and get some new changes in place, so I don't think we would, but I have learned enough in local government, you never say never. So if something comes up in the future and we need to adjust the code, staff would certainly work to do so. And I don't think we can work into the process that there's an automatic notification on a code change. Given how much code we have, I think that would be really difficult, but obviously we do try to work with folks that would be impacted and solicit their feedback as when we go through any code review process.
Thank you. I do just want to wrap up by saying I really appreciate, Tanya and Dre, how much you have engaged with folks around this process and how much time and effort that you've poured into this and how much time and effort the vendors have poured into being a part of this process as well. It's really great to see how collaboratively this was done and seeing folks work together around these codes.
I also want to just add that I know there's a lot of little specific questions that folks may have just as this process goes forward, and zoning and code staff can really answer those for you moving forward. We don't have to get them all perfectly worked out today in terms of those kinds of questions and how the letter's worded. This is really the broad basis of as to where we want the code to be.
This Commissioner Reed here. I do want to mention that I see a question that was submitted by chat that I think is a simple answer. Do businesses count as property owners? And I think that's a yes.
If they own the property, they
so
count as a property.
no matter the nature of the property, those owners will be notified. And otherwise, I just want to echo Commissioner Portillo's comments and say that I appreciate how much thoughtful work was done on this. And I appreciate that in the spring that there was outreach to vendors and that vendors' response and feedback was heard, and that we had the opportunity to give you all some time and space to have more dialogue. So I just also want to appreciate that so many vendors actively engaged in the process and were vocal and really participated in good faith efforts to figure out what makes sense and some potential solutions for issues that we're hearing about in our community. So I just appreciate all of that. And I think that I would agree with, Dre, kind of your assessment earlier that the question of whether or not to increase the amount of time for sales is a much larger question, and really should engage the community and be driven by the community asking for that, I think. And to your point, there is a lot of varied opinions and concerns related to it. So while I understand that desire from some vendors, that I think that that's a much bigger change that it makes sense to me to not make right now, given these other changes. So I just wanted to share my feedback about that. And then I had one other thought. Oh, I thought there was maybe one question that was asked that wasn't addressed, which was about on-site security. And if I missed kind of the answer to that, but I just wanted to make sure that Tanya or Dre could address clarity around that.
That one's relatively simple. Whenever we have individuals bringing RVs or campers onto a property, we just want them to have contacted the health department stating whether they are temporarily tying into a septic system, holding the waste in the camper and dropping it off at a station, or what their plan is.
And I might add that a porta potty, that's already automatically approved by the health department. It's approved method of waste. So a porta potty would not, we wouldn't factor that the same way we would a camper. So as long as a porta potty is being used and the camper waste system is not being utilized, that would be a very open option in our office.
Okay, great. Thanks for giving a bit more clarity about that. I don't have any other comments.
So this is Commissioner Kelly, and yes, good job. Well done working with the public. And I that sort of sounded like it was I don't want to make light of that. That's huge work, and I appreciate our vendors taking the time to come together. Now, the real challenge is engaging the public, I think, in something that's a little more divisive, and seeing if we can come up with some, I don't know that we'll get consensus, but at least get feedback from the public. A couple things as you start to think about that, we heard from vendors say it's a way of recuperating some of the cost of the increased fees. Something that I'd like to see is, you know, there are costs also for the community by increasing the number of days. So that is everything from law enforcement on, you know, because I'm going to expect that maybe 1 or 2 people might bring it into the city of Lawrence where it is prohibited. And so there'll be costs there. There's costs for our rural fire departments. There's just other costs that are involved. So, you know, sort of understanding, you know, how much more does the vendor make for one more day? I don't know that we need to know the exact number, but it would be helpful to know, like, how does that relate to the fee? And is there a balance point there? I'm not real sure, but something like that. And Dre, I'm glad to hear that you've surveyed other counties and what their sale dates are. If we could get their sale dates and also their fee rates, because those seem to be tied together in some way. And I think that would be helpful, at least for me, when we consider other days and that fee schedule. So that's just a little bit of feedback of some things I'd like to have when we start talking about the length of sale and the schedule of fees.
Happy to make a motion. It's Commissioner Reed. I move to approve Home Rule Resolution 21-9-2, sale and use of fireworks.
Second.
All of those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. We will move on to item 3.3, CARES Act review and American Rescue Plan overview.
Thank you, Commissioners. Brooke Sauer is going to be moving into the panel and be giving us a presentation. Just want to clarify, this is really just a discussion item at this point. I'm hoping to get some kind of consensus and those kinds of things, but don't need, we're not looking for specific action tonight. And I'll turn it over to Brooke.
Good evening, Commissioners, and thank you. I'm really excited at this opportunity to discuss the American Rescue Plan Act funding. And I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that?
You are in presentation mode, so we can see your notes in the next slide. It's up to you whether you want to adjust that so we just see your slides.
I do. Bear with me just one moment. Is that good?
We don't see your slides, we just see your desktop.
Oh, no. Okay, sorry. Bear with me here. It wouldn't be a presentation without some sort of technical difficulty for me.
Since we can see your desktop, I will note that it's a pretty picture of South Park.
Aw, well, I owe credit to Cindy Monchizadeh in the treasurer's office for that beautiful photo.
I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, it was a pretty morning. Darn it. Am I still having the same problem?
It's still in presentation mode. If you, you can launch your presentation in a separate window and that makes it not go into presentation mode.
Okay, sorry, guys.
It's under the slideshow tab.
Okay.
You have to end the slideshow and then go into the slideshow options.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. Slideshow. Okay. Oh my gosh. Did that work?
That did not.
Yeah, I think We can make this work, Brooke.
Yeah, as
So
long as there aren't
sorry.
notes that we really shouldn't see, then let's just stick with this.
No, everything is going to be on my notes that I'm going to be discussing. So I really do apologize, though. I was hoping that it could be bigger. So again,
Now it's
I'm
gone,
really-
Brooke.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Now we can't see it.
Okay, here we go. Mm,
There you go.
Okay. This is the problem with having 3 screens. Commissioners, I'd like to walk you through a CARES Act review, an ARPA overview, and then ask the commission for some policy consideration. And then I'd be happy to stand for any questions after our review. When I think about CARES Act, I really think about the timeline. We had initially about 3.5 months to spend approximately $25 million. So in June of 2020, the Spark Executive Committee signaled to us that they intended to distribute funds to all Kansas counties. For Douglas County, the methodology that they used, it was based on population, and that equated to approximately $194 per person in Douglas County, with an additional $10 based on local COVID and unemployment rates. Staff immediately began reviewing policy and implementing policies with respect to acceptance of that federal award, and then subrecipient monitoring policies. Given the magnitude of funding, Douglas County had never really gotten money like this before, let alone handled a number of subrecipients. So we also began work shaping logistics for how to administer and handle these awards in our finance and accounting software. So fast forward a month to July of 2020, Douglas County Commissioners adopted a resolution and we received our distribution of our $25 million. The resolution required that Douglas County shall reimburse municipalities and schools, health organizations, make public health and public institutions whole. So that was a requirement of receipt of the funds with that resolution. And then moving on to August of 2020. In August of 2020, so based on the unified command structure, there was a number of recovery support functions. We tasked those recovery support functions with reviewing each proposal that was submitted to Douglas County in a request for funding based on set criteria. Municipal organizations proposed 50 programs. 44 programs of those were funded, totaling $3 million approximately. Economic recovery, or the RSF1 structure, proposed 66 programs. 10 of those programs were funded in all, totaling $3.4 million. Health and medical services, the RSF2 structure, proposed 48 programs. 45 of those programs were funded. That was by far the largest investment area, totaling $10.4 million. Housing and Human Services, or the RSF3 function, proposed 26 programs. It might seem a little odd that 28 programs were funded because we only received 26 requests. However, we moved Douglas County Community Foundation. We moved their request out of economic recovery, and also the Lady Bird Diner request out of economic recovery, and we moved that over to RSF3. So that's why those numbers kind of seem a little bit off. Those requests were funded in a total of $2.5 million. The education sector, RSF4, they proposed 50 programs. 21 programs were ultimately funded, totaling 3.6 or $3.7 million. So, with all of these programs, Douglas County Commissioners reviewed over 200 program requests, totaling nearly $50 million. In all, commissioners selected 146 programs to be funded in full or in some capacity. There were 56 subrecipients last year of CARES Act funding. In September 2020, actually, it was right around this very same time last year, we faced a monumental task to spend $25 million in, at the time, 3 months. We were given the green light for spending on September 9th, which gave us approximately 75 working days to spend that funding. Fast forward to December of 2020, the original deadline for funds to have been spent. Some programs experienced some spending shortfalls. Others experienced a program deficit. Voluntary recoupment, program transfers, and reallocation processes began. The original deadline was extended on December 28th. It was right down to the line. At that time, $16.7 million were already reported as expenditures as of 12/31/2020. And with that extension, it was extended through March of 2021. All funding was exhausted as that performance period closed on March 1st. I created the pie charts here because I wanted to show the commissioners the difference between what we submitted to the state and what was ultimately approved, what the actual expenses that we submitted to the state as we exhausted those funds. And as you can see, they look pretty identical. The pie chart on the left, it shows all of the expenses broken down by category. There's a pretty nominal variance, mostly seen with public spending shortfalls that was subsequently reallocated to other sectors such as economic recovery and housing and human services. All in all, economic recovery received a 19% increase in funding due to additional needs. From $3.4 million to nearly $4.2 million. And Housing and Human Services received a 14% increase in funding from around $2.5 million to $2.9 million through that program transfer and reallocation process that took place in early December. So where did we stand in relation to our direct aid plan in the top 10 most populous counties in Kansas? I do want to add that this graph does not include Johnson County and Sedgwick counties. Those counties receive their funding directly from the Treasury Department, and we don't have reporting on, their programmatic expenses. Also, I just want to make a small disclaimer before we start looking at some of this data that what the state considered a program or a transfer differed greatly from what the county considered a program or transfer. So earlier I talked about how commissioners reviewed 200 programs and then we ultimately approved 148 programs. This shows it a little bit differently. So I just want to note that because I did have to, I ended up using the state data, what they considered a program or a transfer, just for consistency in reporting and showing this data. The bar graph on the left screen indicates the direct aid plan spending by showing each county's investment by type, broken down by county expenditure, proposed transfers, and proposed programs. You can see that on this graph, Douglas County's orange bar is nearing the top of that chart. And those are our proposed programs. Transfers were defined by the state as direct allocations to other public agencies for their own broad and general use, while programs are defined as competitive grant programs whose recipients were selected through review committee and then allocated funds. So you can see in this chart that Douglas County made a significant investment by allocating nearly 75%, or a little more than $18.8 million of the funding that we received to programs. Using weighted percentages, Finney County devoted 59% of their allocation to programs, followed by Saline County at 36% and Wyandotte at 26%. The chart on the right details the number of programs versus transfers for each county. The state recorded 95 programs and 7 transfers for Douglas County, followed by Wyandotte County, which had 58 programs and 10 transfers. Lastly, Saline County, who proposed 7 programs and 38 transfers.
Brooke, if I can just chime in real quick for
Absolutely.
layman terms, a program is something external to county government, and a transfer would be internal and to other municipalities. Did I got that right?
Yes.
So
yes.
what that means is we distributed more money to outside organizations in our community in comparison to other counties in Kansas.
Correct. Yes. Thank you, Sarah.
Brooke, this is Commissioner Kelly. Can I ask a quick question just to clarify back on your, how many programs we funded? That those 5 weeks are kind of a blur to me, but on some of those we combined them. Isn't that correct? That we had a lot of different requests that we combined into one, especially in that economic development category. So I don't want it to look like we didn't fund a lot of those requests. A lot of them we merged together and had one sort of fiscal agent that managed those requests. Am I remembering that correctly?
Absolutely, Commissioner Kelly. And that was the same for a number of those sectors that I mentioned earlier. I think that there were collaborations amongst, some of those key stakeholders in each of those sectors. Specifically for the economic recovery, Lawrence Restaurant Association and Explore Lawrence were key to those collaborations for that particular sector. So you were spot on. So now that was the end of my CARES Act review. It's hard to put that time that we spent into just a few slides, but I wanted to talk about it and just, let the commission know how that went last year. As Commissioner Kelly said, it's all kind of a blur, and just talking about it a little bit brings it back to light. So with ARPA, this is a little bit, it's going to be handled a little bit differently than the CARES Act funding. $565 million in funds have been made available to Kansas County through the American Rescue Plan Act versus the $400 million made available through the CARES Act. Douglas County and the city of Lawrence received their funding directly from the Treasury per the interim final rule. The city of Eudora, city of Baldwin, and city of Lecompton met the criteria for a non-entitlement unit, and they received their funding passed through the state of Kansas. So all in all, Douglas County will receive around $44.8 million of cash infused into our community through the American Rescue Plan Act. The American Rescue Plan invested significantly more funding in K through 12 and higher education for Kansas as compared to the previous emergency relief funding. And, additionally, I want to say that there are so many funding opportunities available at the state and the federal level. Just last week, the Spark Executive Committee approved $50 million for premium pay for Kansas hospitals to provide the provision of premium pay for Kansas nurses to retain them. CARA, the Kansas Emergency Rental Assistance Program, is also available at the state level. And then the Kansas Housing Corps is also launching a new program for homeowners. So the focus shifts a little bit more from a tenant to a homeowner assistance fund. And those are all funds that are from American Rescue Plan Act, with the exception of CARA, that is available in our community too. Another thing I want to note here is that the state of Kansas, the Office of Recovery, has contracted with a consulting firm, Witt O'Brien, to provide field expertise and technical assistance during the course of the performance period to both subrecipients and state metropolitan cities and counties. This is really important, you know, as we begin to get questions, and even commissioners, if you have questions and, you know, it's something that I haven't heard before, or hasn't come up before, I can reach out to the folks at the state, and they're providing that technical expertise to us at their expense. So that's really nice to have. Douglas County must obligate $23.7 million in American Rescue Plan Act funding within the statutory period, which occurs between March 3rd of 2021 through December 31st of 2024. Expenditures for those obligations must be incurred by December 31st of 2026. So we have a lot more time than 6 months that we had with CARES Act. $11.9 million is available right now for allocation, and an additional $11.9 million will be made available in July of 2022. Funds can be obligated in a number of ways. They can be obligated internally through contracts and agreements, through beneficiaries and grant programs. So internally, that would be for county use, contracts for services, pretty self-explanatory. Beneficiaries would be direct recipients, so direct aid to citizens of Douglas County. And then grants would be that competitive process that we went through with the CARES Act funding. Funding for ongoing or operating expenses, they should be handled with extreme caution, because this is one-time money for one-time expenses. So all of those obligations will be exhausted by 2026, and there would be no more funds available after that time. Another thing that I did want to point out, that, you know, unlike the CARES Act, which had a restriction for use on funds that were adopted as part of the most recently approved budget process as of March of 2020, this does not apply with ARPA funding. So funds can be obligated for budgeted expenditures and projects, as the funds were meant to be incredibly flexible for local government.
So that's the mythical supplanting conversation that we've had. So that these funds could be used to supplant other funds depending on the purpose, or to switch out parts of budgets.
Correct. There are just a few components of eligible uses of funds as it relates to American Rescue Plan Act funding. You know, one of the things that kind of makes it easier for me to wrap my head around is, if it was eligible under CARES Act, chances are it's also eligible under American Rescue Plan Act. There are a few pieces of the legislation that are just a little bit different, and we'll talk about those on the next slides. But, you know, as we're going through some of this information, you know, it's not an exhaustive list. This is just a few examples of how the funding can be spent. But I think they're important to note. So, it can be used for response or mitigation efforts due to the public health emergency. This is by far and wide the most broad term for how we can use the funds. Examples can be behavioral health care needs, so mental health treatment, substance abuse, crisis intervention, services or outreach to promote access, enhancement of public health data system, vaccine programs, testing, vaccine lotteries, programs to encourage those who may not otherwise get vaccinated. We can address disparities in public health outcomes by providing resource navigators, community health workers, and childcare grants. We can provide assistance for households, small business, and nonprofits. And then we can also aid impacted industries such as tourism, travel, hospitality, and this broad respond to economic harms. Treasury has given us great latitude in what we define as an economic harm. And if commission or administrators have any questions about this, please let me know, and I'm happy to reach out to the Office of Recovery to see if it's an eligible use of fund, because it is very broad. We can also provide response we can provide the provision of premium pay up to $13 per hour, but capped at $25,000 per worker. So this is per eligible worker. It's not an annual amount. One belly button equals one worker at $25,000. This particular piece of the law is really meant for those workers who are face-to-face, high contact, frontline workers who are less than 150% of the local median income. And so I've listed the essential workers that are defined on this slide. And those would be eligible workers under that provision of the law. You can also use the fund to provide government services to the extent of reduction in revenue due to COVID-19 relative to the revenues collected in the most recent fiscal year. That was a mouthful, and it sounds a little bit scarier than it really is. So fund recipients may use the fund for the provision of those services using the prior year's as a baseline. So Douglas County, we could use 2019 as a baseline, and we can calculate a sustained revenue loss using a growth adjustment percentage of 4.1%, or the average of the annual revenue growth over 3 full fiscal years prior to COVID-19, whichever is greater. So in this case, the average revenue growth for Douglas County between 2017 and 2020 is 7%. So we would use that 7%. However, using that value, Douglas County did not sustain a revenue loss in 2020. In fact, our revenue increased 9% over the prior year, which is widely due to the addition of the sales tax fund. The revenue growth percentages, with the exception of that average that I just mentioned, are represented on the graph on the right. So you can see our revenue growth by year beginning in 2017 and ending in 2020. And then I've calculated that revenue growth over the prior year, and that's shown on the orange line there in a percentage. So Treasury also provided guidance that the revenue be calculated using an entity-wide basis. That's opposed to source by source. So for example, we wouldn't calculate property tax revenues for 2019 versus property tax revenues in 2020. We would use the total of all of them added together to calculate that revenue loss. So I think that that's important to note, specifically with the addition of the sales tax fund in 2019. halfway through the year. I think we added that in April. So when we went into 2020 and we had a full year of collection on sales tax in that fund, we really see that amount bolstered because we had a full year of collection for that fund. The graph on the left shows the assessed value growth percentage in relation to the real estate assessed values for the past 10 years. The assessed values grew at a rate of 2.7% in 2021. This is the lowest rate of growth in property values since 2014, where we saw an increase of 2.2% over the prior year. That is not including 2014. The 2014 increase was on the heel of an observed decrease in assessed value that occurred in 2013 at -3%. The highest rate is noted in 2017 at 6.6%. With the American Rescue Plan Act funds, we can also make investments to improve access to clean drinking water, invest in wastewater and stormwater infrastructure, or investments in broadband infrastructure to provide unserved or underserved location with new or expanded access. Some examples of project for water infrastructure can include treatment, transmission, distribution, including lead service, line replacement, source rehabilitation and decontamination, storage consolidation, and new systems development, just to name a few. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. The interim final rule with respect to broadband projects is such so that we can deliver minimum speeds of 100 megabytes per second download and 100 megabytes per second upload. Projects must also be designed to serve unserved or underserved households and businesses. A couple of ineligible uses for the state and local fiscal recovery funds include deposits made into any pension fund. So I just want to note on this slide that that is really specific to pension fund deposits into pension funds like at the state level. So this would not be employer match for or employer shares for like capers. So if we fund a payroll position for a vaccine clinic worker for the health department, and that person is a full-time worker, and you know, the employer makes a contribution to capers for them to work there, that is completely covered under this law. So this is really just if there are gaps that exist at the state level in a pension fund, that is not an acceptable use of this fund. The fund can also not be used to directly or indirectly offset a reduction in the net tax revenue of a state or territory resulting from a change in law, regulation, or administrative interpretation. We can also not use the fund to fund debt service, legal settlements, judgments, and deposits to reserve funds. In general, infrastructure spending is not considered an eligible expense outside of water, sewer, and broadband investments. With that being said, if the provision of the law is used for to satisfy revenue loss, you can then use those funds for projects, and that would be the only way that you could do that. All right, so we've gone over the eligible uses of funds, and you know, I really want to ask commissioners some policy considerations as we move forward and start to think about how we use these funds. So, you know, given the broad use of funds, does commission have directions or priorities for how we use these funds? Define who are the intended recipients of the funding and what is the eligibility criteria that we would set. How much funding will be made available for competitive grant programs? What's the timeline for that proposal process? Will the performance period of the grant align with the county's performance period? Do we want to set something different for them? Do we want to have multiple rounds of funding? Is there a maximum award amount? How much spending will be made available for our internal county programs as opposed to external applicants for their programs? And when are we required to submit proposal or seek board approval for that internal process? And I'd also like to talk a little bit about the composition of the review committee to make a recommendation to the board if we do intend to go down the competitive grant process. So I'd like to open it up to commissioners to offer thoughts or opinions. And if you guys don't mind, I can stop sharing my screen unless you had a specific slide you want me to go back to that you might have questions about.
I think that's great, Brooke. If you
Okay.
could. And I just before commissioners start the conversation, I just want to chime in that, you know, we've had some internal conversations about this, and I think that there is some potential here. One of the things I want to say up front is that, you know, last time 6 months to spend this, or 5 months, was a blessing and a curse. We didn't have the time to necessarily be as deliberate as we can be with how these funds are used. That being said, we know that there are urgent and emergency needs in our community today for how we respond to this. So I think one of the questions really before the commissioners, as we think about how to disperse these funds, is how do we balance those two things? How do we balance the kind of immediate emergency needs that we're seeing, and you've got a request later in your agenda on that? And then also, how can we be a little bit, take some time and be a little bit more long-term focused on some of the, you know, maybe longer term or medium range goals that we want to see. And that's even related to another item on your agenda today related to a study for supportive housing. So I do think that leads us to a process probably multifaceted, that's probably has some immediate needs spent, but that also has some time that allows folks to really be deliberate and us get really good data on what we need for those things. And I think we can balance both things as we move forward in this process. I don't think we have to completely scope it out tonight. I think we're pretty good at it based off commissioners' feedback to be able to come back and bring you some items to respond to. But I do think we are leaning towards, you know, being able to do a little bit of both in terms of how do we respond in the immediate sense, and then how do we move long term.
This is Commissioner Portillo. Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that. And thank you, Brooke. I really appreciate the overview, both of ARPA and kind of a wrap up of how the CARES funds were spent in our community. I know that was quite the Herculean lift. So thank you to the previous commission and Commissioner Kelly for going through all of those proposals. Sarah, I just have to say, I completely agree with you. I think that this is not going to be just one way of doing things. I think we have to decide what amount of funds we want to use for that emergency piece right now. I know it's probably asking too much, but I do wonder if you have some estimate on what are some of the emergency needs that we're seeing, and are we seeing those mostly as internal things within the county, or are those mostly coming from our external partner agencies and community partners? Or do you have a breakdown of how much do we need internally in emergency use, and thinking about public health in particular, which is external but closer to us, and then some of our community-based partners?
We don't have an exact number yet, but I do know that I think they are mostly external, including public health. That's one of the processes that we want to try to get, is what is going to be needed for booster vaccines, that process moving forward. Plus also, requests for emergency rental and utility assistance, that particularly as folks face the eviction moratoriums ending, those kinds of emergency needs. What I would say is that, I think we could balance some things between when I look at how we approached it, Brooke had on a slide that we We have 11.9 now. We're going to get 11.9 in about a year, a little less than that. So I'm always reluctant to spend money until we have it. So I think in some ways that provides some sort of basis into how we break some of those things up. I would say that, based off even what we saw sometimes last time, 10% of 11.9 million is a pretty good chunk. 15%, would represent some, I think we could come up with what I would call a ballpark in terms of a percentage that we could allocate towards emergency funding, come up with a more streamlined, quick process as to how to approach that. And then just keep an eye on it. If it gets low, we can come back to commissioners. We're going to be talking about this more deliberate, long-term sustainable process anyway. And we can provide you that reporting and sort of tell you like how we're doing in terms of that spending and how do we want to approach it. So I think some of those percentage type targets for like immediate needs would be something that we could establish pretty quickly and get some procedures in place as to how we want to do that distribution, while we also then work on a more long-term solution in terms of how can we make some real sustainable, tangible improvements in our community moving forward on some key issues. One of the things Brooke's already started working on different processes to sort of begin to track this information. I think most folks can get a sense from this. These are federal funds. They come with strings. They come with a large amount of accounting, and frankly, that responsibility is on us as Douglas County to make sure that those funds are spent appropriately. So I think folks should be really thoughtful as to how they approach this so that they can meet those requirements as to moving into that. One idea that I think that would have some real potential as we try to think about short and long term, there might be some studies and you've got a request last week related to the CPPR and the homelessness needs assessment. You've got a request on the budget today related to supportive housing needs. Maybe that's something that we could include in that sort of emergent funding pool. So can we get some data sets of some information to really help us make good decisions moving forward? I think we could come back with some of those pieces and maybe some estimations to maybe get us through to spring when we would have a better sense of what those percentages would look like. One idea that I think has some real potential to help us get a sense of that long term was, we think a lot about RFP processes, and how we did that last time was really sort of send out a shortened, request for proposals, and then we receive proposals back from the community. Another thing that happens oftentimes in grant cycles is you have to file a notice of intent. Could we ask some of our community partners to give us a much briefer, not fully fleshed out 15-page document of what they're looking at, but what are they thinking about? And then that would really, I think, be able to provide the commissioners with a sense of what is the community thinking about in terms of how we could respond to this, use these funds appropriately. So I think that could be something that we use this fall for that sort of longer term, and allows you to get some data on what it is the community's thinking, and allows you to be deliberate and selective as to how do you want to set your focus. The other thing that I think another key thing that needs to be a consideration pretty early on is that conversation around, oh gosh, why am I blanking? Pay related to emergency workers and for essential workers. This community is full of essential workers. I think it's one of those things I'm going to look for some direction from the commission as to how to approach that. If we do want to entertain those proposals, for what type of workers, and how do we be very specific? I will tell you, I think those needs would quickly outstretch what we could do in terms of long-term sustainability. And then ultimately those funds are one time. So then what happens in a couple of years when those funds go away and salaries drop? How would we be able to approach that? So it's some of those types of things in terms of process, what's important to you, and beginning to get a sense of your priorities. I think that would help. I know I went more than you wanted to hear there, but
I appreciate all of the background. I also really like the idea of a letter of intent process before a full RFP, so we can get some of that information from our community partners without asking them to invest a lot of time in a full proposal. so that we can help kind of hone in on some of those goals. I will say that just thinking about priorities for our community overall, we are still in the midst of a public health crisis. And so public health has to be the thing that rises to the top for me as we think about booster shots, as we think about retaining employees within our health department. We know that across the state, we've seen quite an exodus of folks from public health. And I want to make sure that we have all of the essential employees that we need to continue to serve our community in the ways that we have. But I like this idea of thinking about a percentage for kind of emergency and immediate use, and then holding back a larger percentage. We were very intentional about not building these funds into our annual budget so that we could think about these as big one-time catalyst funds. And I think that's an important piece of it. So what are we hearing back from these studies? Are there additional pieces of information we need? And then how can we make those really key investments so that we can use these one-time funds in a way that we see the biggest return for our community?
Commissioners, I also wanted to offer, in terms of planning work that has been going on with that aligns with existing efforts, and namely the community health plan. I wanted to just acknowledge, and you may hear from stakeholders in public comment, but related to some of the eligible expenses, childcare. A lot of tremendous work has been happening as an outgrowth of the anti-poverty community health plan around early care. So there's that work group has been really working in a timely but thoughtful way to have some potential requests for these kind of funds, but they're thinking in short-term and long-term investments, and sustainability is chief among them, and leveraging not only county dollars, city dollars, but foundation and other state dollars that'll be available too.
I appreciate that. And I have really appreciated the conversations we're having, not just within our community, but statewide, nationwide around early childcare. One of the things I keep hearing locally is the terrible, terrible pay that we have for early childcare providers. And this is one where I get really concerned, because we have these funds where I would want us to just say, let's go ahead and increase that pay. These are essential workers. But then what do we do when in 2 years these funds are gone and we don't have a plan for keeping that pay high? Because this is basic human infrastructure that we need. And so however we do this, I want to make sure we have a plan for sustainability. I'm not at all opposed to using these funds to increase pay. I think we have too many people who are not getting paid enough. And I want to make sure that if we do that, we're not setting ourselves up for a lot of hurt in 2 years.
Strategy to that I think we might want to think about as we look at this is, could we, when if you were going to start a whole new operation, you've got a lot of costs that are involved in that, and pay and salaries are one of them. Could these funds, since they are one time, be better matched to some one-time startup costs that could then, or capital costs in terms of investment in buildings and equipment that could then lower that cost moving forward, so that then if they were to solicit or get funding from foundations or other providers, that that we've reduced the amount of that the cost is. I know that may not be enough, but I think it's one of those things that I want to look for as we try to be creative in how to do this, so that we're not in a situation where in several years from now, the money runs out and we've left folks really in a precarious position in terms of how do they support their operations moving forward.
And I think this is sustainability, particularly as it relates to housing and homelessness services, has been something that has been chief of mind in all the conversations that we've been having with the stakeholder group. And it's a significant concern for the county and the city. We want to make sure we're being thoughtful that whatever we do, we can invest in a way that is sustainable. But I think the same is true with childcare. I think we've got a really thoughtful group of folks that are working on that, and they get it. But we've got some creative thinkers there, and couldn't agree with you more though, Commissioner Portillo.
This is Commissioner Reed. Well, I'll just quickly echo sentiments that I do think it makes sense to kind of have a multi-phased approach to this, and that's the smart way for us to take the time that we have to invest the dollars wisely. But I do think, I think at 10% at least sort of reserve or allocation right up front for some emergency needs, it is necessary. I think, you know, it's been a number of months now that I've received relatively frequent correspondence or questions about these funds and how they'll be utilized. And, you know, we're starting the conversation now, and we did so very deliberately to get through our general budget process and make sure we understood, and that staff and Brooke, I really appreciate the thorough packet and all the investigation that the staff has done to make sure we really understand what those strings attached are and how we need to account for them. So you know, we have some dollars, we have some emergency needs, and I want to figure out a process for addressing some of that while we continue to think through and wait for some of that information from the housing needs assessment that we should have by spring in particular, to really have some hopefully clear guidance about where dollars would have high impact, and what those investments would be like. And so I very much support that approach. And I also want to mention that for me, I mean, human infrastructure costs and, you know, affordable housing and some further enhancing access to resources and resource navigation, those are huge priorities for me. And I think that they're priorities for our community, and those conversations are happening in a whole host of spaces in a variety of different ways. So that's a priority for me. And then also in terms of the infrastructure, I appreciate knowing that it's limited to water, waste, and broadband. I've had some conversations with people wondering about roads and bridges. And so that's a good clarification to know and kind of what people think of when they hear the word infrastructure. So I appreciate knowing how limited it is. I'm particularly interested in digging in more to how we can make investments in broadband infrastructure, just for our rural community members. Internet access, reliable internet access is, it's an access issue. And so I know there's a lot of layers in that conversation. There's state legislative issues, there's there's a lot, but that's a conversation that I would very much like to understand more and get more information about what makes sense for some of those dollars, and how do we increase access, because that we know internet access has a multitude of, like, it's a domino effect, right? It affects people's ability to work, to complete school, to have access to emergency weather information. So that's another priority for me. And I think that otherwise, I'm interested in hearing more from staff, I guess, about the notion of a review committee for making recommendations, and certainly interested in hearing fellow commissioners' thoughts on that. But
could I just speak to the broadband piece really quickly? I completely agree with you, Commissioner Reed. Broadband is incredibly important. These funds do specifically focus on areas that don't have ready access to broadband, which a number of our rural communities in Douglas County, I think, would fall into that. The state, prior to ARPA funds even coming down, the Department of Commerce has been doing quite a bit of work around rural broadband. And so this may be one where we could reach out to our partners at the Department of Commerce and ask what's happening, and if there is a way that we could become a bit more prioritized if we were to think about some of these funds as matching funds for other state programs and things that the state has going on. I know that matching funds is one of those words we heard quite a bit from many of our community partners, but this might be one where we could think of ourselves as matching and trying to tap into some of those state resources.
That's a great
as
idea.
well.
And I think that's something we can, as a staff, go back and do a little bit more digging on and bring some more information back to you.
Yeah, and on the digital equity piece, I would offer that the county joined the Kansas City Coalition for Digital Inclusion last year, and it's a tremendous work group of both sides of the state line. It's facilitated by the Kansas City, Missouri Public Library System, but the stakeholders are from all over the metro area, and they're thrilled to have Lawrence Douglas County joining. So we have folks from, then we have a mini digital equity group that's been meeting for the last year as well too. So again, I think we've positioned through our unified command response, we've already positioned a lot of really great planning infrastructure, if you will, for how we could go about doing this in the future.
To the review committee, one thing, and the last time we had the RSF functions. So, which, man, I forgot what RSF stands for, Recovery Support Function. So we had recovery support functions of Unified Command to really help vet projects in those 4 areas. I wasn't thinking we would use that structure moving forward. So the thought of some sort of review committee is, and just to really get your thoughts, are you comfortable with staff doing that review? It just was a huge process last year. I kind of want to make it, I want the commission to have full authority and autonomy as to what we go, as to where we're headed, but I also don't want to burden you with 200 applications again. So and we don't have to decide that today. I just think that's something for you to be thinking about. How do we want to approach that review process? And maybe we'll know more once we get some sort of notices of intent and how that would come forward.
Well, and there are 2 pieces of that for me. One, these funds are not using those same function areas, and we have more time. And so I think it's an important part of our role to gather that public comment and engage in that process to make sure that this fits our community priorities overall. And I'd be really worried if we said we're going to pull together external stakeholders, because we will inevitably leave someone out. And so I think we want to get as much public comment and public input as possible, and potentially having those letters of intent can help us say, here are the civic organizations, here are the community leaders that we need to get feedback from. But I would be hesitant to set up an entirely new vetting process. But I am very open to hearing my fellow commissioners' thoughts on that.
So I'm just going to respond to some of the things I've heard said and then offer maybe a few other thoughts. I really like the idea of a set aside for emergency at a certain percentage. I think that's up front with the many folks that are out there right now saying, how are you going to spend this money? And like even the proposal we had last week, was there a workaround I didn't know about? And I just think we need to be upfront and say these are for emergency uses. And if we decide studies is another thing, I think that makes sense to me, because one of the things I do want to make sure is that our allocations are as data informed as possible. That was something we did not have the luxury of really with CARES Act funds. It happened so quickly, and I'm not saying we made bad choices, of course, because we made the choices, but I mean, I think it also, one example would be how we did utility assistance, and there was a lot of dollars put to assist utility assistance that actually wasn't getting dispersed in the ways that, and so I think in some ways having some better understanding, not that we're not going to make any mistakes, but at least with some better data, we might have additional success with some of these dollars. I think it's really important for us to sort of identify what our priorities are if we use a review committee, which I'm really not against. I think we asked a lot of the RSF committees in a short amount of time, and we added an equity piece to that, which I think was a really important focus for us. But I also think some of our RSF functions weren't real clear on what they were supposed to be doing with that information. And so as we establish some of our priorities, I think that could help a review committee. And I think I just think there would be some possibilities there. For me, and I appreciate what Commissioner Portillo said, you know, the virus, in some ways, I think we're sort of weary from the virus right now, and we don't sometimes take into account how high our numbers are right now and the things that we need to do to mitigate that. When we did this back in December, that was my number one priority, was mitigating the virus and doing all the things that we needed to do. And that still is a high priority for me. I've heard the word sustainability by my count about 32 times so far in this discussion. So I think I'll add 33, that's a really high priority for me. And, how do we, I think it's interesting, Sarah, that idea of like, can we put it towards capital projects? I'd want to work with some of our organizations, like, will that really solve the problem? Or, were we saving for capital projects a long way out? And in the end, we may not be sustainable. And then I think the last one for me I carry it over from our CARES Act work is really protecting vulnerable populations. We know that the virus has hit many marginalized populations, vulnerable populations more significantly. Sometimes those communities maybe don't have as strong as a voice. And to me, that's in the uses that are allowable. And I want to make sure we're thinking about that. At the same time, we had a housing problem before COVID-19. Many of these problems were there, but I think we can make a huge dent in it. We may not make as big of a dent. We might not eliminate it, but I think this is just I hope a once in a lifetime opportunity with these dollars to make a big difference for a lot of our vulnerable populations. So those are some of the priorities for me and some of the sort of process things that I'm thinking about. I love the idea of an intent. I think it gives us a chance to bring some groups together collaboratively to maybe think about it. That happened in CARES Act. We'd get some that, wow. And Sarah, I just want to say, I would be very open to some staff support for the county in handling all of this. That was what Brooke and your whole team had to do in December. And this is less money, but not much less. I think really highlighted for me that if we had a person who could help maybe people with some of these grants, some of the program proposals, because when some of those came through and I met with some of the people who provide them, not everybody's used to writing grants, and that's extra work. So those are just some of my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly. I will just say that the Governor Kelly's Commission on Racial Equity and Justice, we did address how local governments should think about ARPA funds. And one of the main pieces that I just want to highlight is really lowering the administrative burden for folks, particularly as we think about emergency funds. And I think that Commissioner Kelly kind of pointed to that with some of the kind of utility assistance and things like that. We want to make sure that as we're allocating these funds, we have the lowest administrative burden on the communities that need them. And again, centering our most vulnerable communities. So how can we use these funds to really think about centering the communities that need them the most? And so I would be really interested in thinking about an equity in all policies approach. So when folks put in that letter of intent, how are they demonstrating that they are centering our most vulnerable populations and centering the recovery of our most vulnerable populations from this pandemic?
And if I could add to that, we may have to provide some support for them in understanding that. I've heard from a couple, like their equity work where they're going, they want help with that. And that may be something that we need to provide them. So.
Yes, though I think that we also need our partners to educate themselves around the important things in our community. And we have a number of community partners that do that really well. And I would hate to say that we have to provide that we're providing those for some of the agencies that have the most privilege. And then that's kind of, again, decentering the communities that need us the most.
I think those are all really good points. And I think those are some considerations that we can look as to how we do this. The more and more I think about this letter of intent idea, I think it can be really helpful in that space because, you'll be able to identify some of those issues. We'll be able to see areas for collaboration. And I think you'll be able to respond with like, I see this as a need, but I don't see it as big of a need as here. And that was really one of the feedback pieces we got from the CARES Act the first time around was, hey, we went through all this work and then you just combined all restaurant applications into one giant Lawrence Restaurant Association process. So, you know, the more we can sort of get an idea of where we want to go ahead of time before people invest a lot of time and energy, because like, as Brooke said, this is very broad. This can be used for all kinds of things. And so the more we can sort of tell folks up front, like our intent priorities, our priority areas are in these places, I think it just helps just be transparent and upfront with the community as they respond to it. Because I mean, you will get a lot of, this money will go very fast. We will have requests for at least double, if not triple, this amount of funding. That's what we saw the first time with CARES Act. And I anticipate seeing it again. You know, I think the other thing too is, unlike CARES Act, where all of the funds came to the county then for distribution to cities, our city partners have funds. So I do think that's one of the things that we can ask about. You know, could you, you know, if it was, oh, I don't know, a utility assistance program in Eudora, which was an example of a program that we had during the CARES Act, is the city of Eudora contributing to that program as well? Are those things that we're looking for? And I think those are some processes that we can come up with as well as we try to figure out what questions we want to ask to really, on this letter of this sort of notice of intent, that will help folks make the kind of decisions that we want them to make.
And I do want to bolster something that Commissioner Kelly said earlier as well, that I would be supportive if we need more support internally to run all these processes. I mean, this is a massive undertaking. And so we need to have the administrative infrastructure in the county so that we're not passing on administrative burdens to our community.
Commissioners, I was just going to add that the Government Alliance for Race and Equity is going to do a 5-part training series or webinar series on how an equitable frameworks for ARPA funds. If you aren't signed up for those emails already, I can walk you through getting signed up for your own account so you get the emails too. There's conversations happening in communities all over the network, all over the country. But I intend to sign up for those. I'm guessing Brooke will as well, and others in this organization. So we can start learning from what they're doing. And maybe Brooke did some really awesome trainings mini webinars throughout the CARES Act. So we can get creative here too about how we're bringing folks up to speed about how this organization is using a racial equity lens to administer these funds as well with the GARE network.
This is Commissioner Reed here. I think I'll just add, because I don't think I echoed the sentiments earlier, that a notice of intent is a really smart idea to me. I think that will help us get more tangible about our conversation. So I appreciate that idea.
And I know we're not taking action on this item, but I do want to open it up if we're done with commissioner questions. So I guess that was much more commissioner discussion, and I'm sorry for starting that. But I do want to open this up for public comment if we have anyone for public comment on this item.
So my name is Shannon Oury. I'm the executive director of the Housing Authority. Do I need to push something? Am I good? And one of the things I just like to say is this is, as you've said, a once in a lifetime opportunity. And we're going to need some very specific direction on what can be used for affordable housing. We have a subgroup that's working on shovel-ready capital improvement plans. I'm positive every single person who already had, I mean, we have a list of plans that we already have. The Housing Authority has, Tenants to Homeowners has, Willow has some ideas. And so we need direction on exactly how these funds, because as I've looked at the interim rule, there's some very specific requirements for how we can do that. And so, but I just really want to advocate for that. Everyone has talked about sustainability. We're the largest voucher administrator in the county, and these funds are not for vouchers. I mean, I'm just going to say it flat out. It's not sustainable. When the money runs out, you will come to me and say, how can we keep these people housed? And I will say, I cannot. I do not have the money to do that. And we are already sort of starting down that road now with some of the special funding that we've had. And so I just want to be really clear about, please make capital funding for affordable housing, for special populations, for elderly, for supportive housing, the priority with these funds, because that's the only way it's going to be sustainable.
Thank you.
Kim Polson, I'm going to move you over to the panel. Give me just a minute. Sorry, Kim, it's taking longer. We'll get you there in a minute. Oh, there she is. Kim, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Is everybody able to hear me?
Yes.
Great, great. Thank you. My name is Kim Polson. I live at 4308 Crofton Terrace in Lawrence. I'm the executive director of the Community Children's Center and one of the conveners of the Early Care and Education Work Group that is working on the children and child care objectives from the Community Health Plan to reduce poverty, as well as the creation of a Douglas County Early Childhood Community Center at the school district's Kennedy Building. I am also the mother to 6 children. So I am here tonight, commissioners, to talk with you and ask you to keep early childhood care and education at the front of your minds as you discuss how Douglas County could best utilize the American Rescue Plan Act funds that will be coming into our community. The current care and education infrastructure for our youngest residents is in a precarious state. And while that's been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic, this state existed well before the pandemic. Douglas County has over 7,000 residents under the age of 6, and for over 5,500 of those children, all their parents are in the labor force. Yet the capacity to which Douglas County's licensed childcare options can meet the potential demand is only 63%. It's most difficult for families with infants and toddlers, where for every 1 childcare slot, there are 10 children who could fill it. And since 2019, Douglas County has lost 20 licensed childcare facilities. And that care that is available is often not affordable, with the average cost of childcare in Douglas County for an infant at over $13,000 per year. Now, the Department of Health and Human Services defines childcare as affordable if it costs no more than 7% of household income. Based on the median income for Douglas County, it would require 14% of household income for a 4-year-old to attend preschool. And for a single parent making minimum wage, it could require up to 50%. Now, we have a unique opportunity with the ARPA fund dollars to make a significant impact in the early care and education infrastructure, impacting availability, accessibility, and affordability for Douglas County families with young children. And the creation of an early childhood community center and a robust early childhood support system for Douglas County is the first step. So I ask that you consider funding the reimagining of this human infrastructure, which will include capital improvements to the Kennedy Building so it can fully function as a center for early childhood, the development of a professional pipeline support and retention of early care and education providers across Douglas County, the establishment of a family resource center to strengthen families with young children and meet basic needs, and dollars for subsidies and scholarships to make the cost of high quality early care and education affordable for all Douglas County families and children, particularly the most vulnerable and marginalized. as we establish innovative, long-term partnerships, community investments, and funding strategies for sustainability. A strong early childhood care and education system is a benefit to our entire community and warrants broad community investment. And Douglas County can set the tone for additional stakeholders by making this a priority and committing ARPA funds to this effort. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else for public comment on this item? Okay. Do you feel as though you have the direction that you need from the commission?
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation. And I think what you'll see from staff is that we will go back and take this feedback and develop into some timelines and some additional documents and procedures for you all to review. And we'll try to bring that back to you at our earliest convenience. I think it'll be at least a couple weeks, but try to bring something back to you soon so that we can talk about this further. But thank you. Yeah, I think we're good.
Great. We have been going for 2 hours and 15 minutes now. So I'm going to ask for us to take a quick 5-minute break before we return for a couple more regular agenda items. So we will come back at 7:52. You all for the quick break. We are back and we will go to item 3.4, update on the Housing Stabilization Collaborative in Kansas Emergency Rent Assistance Program.
Commissioners, I'll start this out. Jill Joliker, Assistant County Administrator. We have with us, I was so grateful to Gabby Sprague and Mariel Ferrero for hanging out with us till we get to this agenda item. It is a really timely, important agenda item, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to bring it to you all today. I want to let Gabby and Mariel team up together to give you a sense of the extreme pressures that are being put on the Housing Stabilization Collaborative and the partners that they work with. Housing Authority is chief among them, and that's why you have Mariel with you today. And just to illustrate just how dire the situation is, and some keen ideas to prevent homelessness, and give you an update on some of the measures that Housing Stabilization Collaborative is taking with the resources that are available at the state, but also looking to the county to be a stopgap and again, try to prevent folks from being evicted from their homes. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Gabby to start things off.
Thanks, Jill. And yeah, like Jill said, I think that the Housing Stabilization Collaborative is seeing the effects of the moratorium ending. I think that we've been able to catch a lot of folks and be able to stabilize them. However, at the same time with the moratorium ending, all the legal protections for them have now gone out the window and evictions are still happening due to non-payment of rent. It's been very difficult at the county district court level to get numbers as far as evictions. However, I'd say that 24 out of the 33 households that were served in August through the Housing Stabilization Collaborative, and those numbers aren't super high because we don't really have a lot of money at this point. But having said that, 24 out of the 33 households had an eviction notice for non-payment of rent. I also attended a national call 2 weeks ago with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and they talked about evictions happening. They had numbers from 2016 actually, but we're just like, yeah, the moratorium ending is going to increase these. But one part of it, the Eviction Lab, which is a national organization that does the eviction sort of data, they were talking, anyway, I asked them a question, like how would you suggest that we get information about evictions in our local community? And they said, look to tenant organizers in town, which I felt like that was kind of like a self-referral, and look to the court system. So we've been looking to the court system and that's been difficult. However, other tenant organizers in town we know of at least 50 evictions happening to different mobile park homes, mobile park, areas. So we know of at least like 70 evictions between all of us. I know that Family Promise of Lawrence gets consistent calls up to 13 a day for non-payment of rent, needing rental assistance. I don't think that I don't think that, although we haven't been able to get exact numbers, I know evictions are still occurring. So yeah, it's been very difficult having not a lot of funding to be able to address that concern. The CARE program, which has $165-ish million and have distributed, I don't know the number now, but it was about 10% at the time of the beginning of August. They have not been getting funding out fast enough, it seems. And having been on the side of helping people sign up for it, I helped somebody sign up March 15th when it opened, and they didn't get funded until last month. And then similarly, for the co-ops, I do the finances for people's own and operate collective housing. So I've seen also the landlord side of things. And although they've been communicating that their processes are getting more quick, I signed somebody up on the 3rd of last month, and they just yesterday heard back. So I know that the CARE program, although they are looking to avoid evictions, is often not quick enough. Knowing those 70 evictions are currently happening, I don't think that if we signed all those people up today, I guarantee a good portion of them would still get evicted. So we submitted an application to the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation on behalf of the HSC to their Bridge to Housing Stability application. We have not heard back. I checked in with James Chisholm, who's the ESG program manager over there, who is reading these applications, and he emailed me back Monday of this week saying that we were looking through applications and they would get back with us. I received an email from Danny that was forwarded from the KHRC about another sort of presentation that they're putting on October 3rd. And it still seems like the narrative is we have all these processes in place. The process is getting more quick. And they're going to show a Bridge to Housing Stability program that they already have running that is, from my perspective, intended to keep folks housed by or help provide case management for people who are facing eviction or have already been evicted, waiting for the CARE program to process. And that feels like a very reactive way of engaging with this, when I know, from the landlord's perspective, from engaging with the CARE program on behalf of tenants here in Douglas County, that we can prevent evictions if we have money now. So all of that to say that we're doing our best and trying to put out as many feelers as possible for funding that is more immediately accessible in Douglas County. However, it's been difficult, which thus the emergency asked for the ARPA funds for $125,000. Jill kind of set this up a little bit differently than I was envisioning this. So all of that to say that was kind of off the cuff, what I just told you. But yeah, and we, in addition to the rental assistance program, we are also looking to do landlord engagement, talking about ways that we know that the housing issues have been around before the pandemic, and there's this emergency need that I just talked about. We're also looking at future needs through the landlord engagement arm of the HSC, which is going to be starting this month, and Marielle is going to be a person who leads a lot of those conversations. Marielle, do you want to talk a little bit about what the HSC is planning as far as landlord engagement?
Sure, Gabby, thank you. And I think this kind of addition to the HSC is essential in that we are finding out through programs such as CARA that the conversation not only needs to happen between service providers and the tenants, but the landlords as well. And that's the issue we're running into often, is that landlords are feeling, that they're not in this conversation. And we do have the opportunity with a lot of this emergency funding to incentivize and engage them. And so this is, I think, as repeating as many folks have said, this is the once in a lifetime opportunity we have to bring everyone to the conversation. And so this particular branch of the HSC will be dedicated to getting more of a unified front from our service providers and how we engage landlords and how we get them to the conversation. So we will be Gabby and myself will be conducting monthly meetings with service providers, with stakeholders who work directly in housing stabilization on how they talk to landlords, what their experiences are like, what the successes and challenges have been, and then how can we move forward to begin engaging landlords in a deeper way, in a more productive way, in a way that's going to make them feel like, yes, they're a part of the conversation. Yes, there are benefits to really working with these service providers who have funding, who have clientele in need, who have been working with populations who are the most marginalized, who have the highest barriers for renting. And so that is a big initiative we're planning to push. And I think, as my director mentioned in a public comment earlier, we're talking sustainability. And the way we can be sustainable is not only providing this upfront emergency funding to get landlords to be like, yes, I do want to keep my tenants in their house. I don't want to lose this income. But also have that sustainability tool of, we're continuing to engage them, we're continuing to make them feel and know that they are very essential in how we structure sustainable housing for the future. So that's a little bit, we're hoping to provide a lot more on what that's going to look like for the future. Gabby and I have been working a lot of ideas, and we're going to meet with these service providers this coming week to start dreaming up how we can be more collaborative, how we can be more engaging, and how we can really start a larger conversation on how we engage landlords. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you both. I can certainly hear the frustration about funds that are there that aren't getting pushed out the door as quickly as they're needed. And that's incredibly frustrating. And I just want to say a big thank you to both of you for being a part of the collaborative work that's happening in our community. I will open this up for questions from commissioners. Questions?
I don't have any questions. Thanks for the presentation. That was great.
A couple things I want to just mention. So last time the HSC was at a county commission meeting, Commissioner Shannon Portillo brought up equity, and I don't feel like our answers were super well thought out. I feel like the HSC kind of formed in emergency, so there hasn't been the forethought there. However, bringing me on, I think that is a little bit kind of allowing for some of that more program development sort of work to be occurring. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the approaches to equity that we're looking at, particularly as far as income eligibility and racial and ethnic or ethnicity equity. So yeah, we're looking at making the application more accessible and racially equitable. We currently have a paper application. I haven't been able to print that off and go places with it yet, but we're looking to be able to do that. Things are kind of slowing down right now since we don't have a lot of the funding. Our current income eligibility is less than 30% annual median income in Douglas County, which is going to be a conversation due to some of our funding being up to even 80% of the annual median income. So we're kind of looking at maybe expanding that a little more broadly and talking about low wages. It kind of makes sense to me. And then I also wanted to show race and ethnicity demographics for at least from when I was brought on in March. Actually, the funding or the money starts in April through August 31st, 15 days ago. So can I share my screen, Jill? Is that a possibility? Cool. So I just wanted to show this. Can you see my spreadsheet?
You may want to expand it just a little bit, Gabby.
Does this work?
That's good.
Great.
And if you want to email that to me afterwards,
I will. Yeah, I will email it. So it's kind of broken down in households, basically the number of households that have been given rental assistance from April 8th to August 31st, and broken down into funding, the funding dispersed. And then so it's broken down with race here and then ethnicity here. Like I want to mention, these are the HUD race and ethnicity categories. I would probably do things a little bit differently than HUD does, but these are what we're working with. This population percentage here was pulled from the 2018 Lawrence Douglas County Public Health Equity Report. And I can just give you a few moments here to look at that while I talk. Yeah, some of the takeaways that I take away from this is there's a higher proportion of Black households served than the Black population in Douglas County. The funding provided to Black households is similarly distributed. Higher proportion of Latinx households served in the population in Douglas County. The outreach to Native population in Douglas County, I think, needs a little bit of improving based off of the funding dispersed here. And then also outreach to Asian population. I don't really understand what Asian means though. So does it mean like Indian? Does it mean East Asian? Does it mean from Russia, etc.? Again, these are HUD race and ethnicity categories. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. I also, on that national call, and I will send that to you all. I send it to Jill to share with you all. I also wanted to share that on the national call, there was a presentation by the Urban Institute for emergency rental assistance programs, and there was a tool provided called the Racial Equity Checklist, which I am now going through and looking to employ all of those things, or at least a good portion of those things as much as possible with our collaboration and community partners. One thing that stuck out to me, Commissioner Shannon Portillo, is when you said we need to reduce the administrative burden on our community. And I think the same goes for like even from community partners down to the folks that are actually being served. Like people shouldn't need to get together like their rental ledger and income qualifications, things like that. So I'm looking to reduce things in that way. I know that one of the sources of funding, that community development block grant funding, actually has it built into where only 20% has to be actual source documents, and the 80% can be self-certified. So I'm going to be able to include that in this next sort of round of funding whenever we are able to get it and start distributing it. So yeah, just wanted to speak to that from the last meeting, Commissioner Shannon Portillo. And you all.
I really appreciate the update, and I really appreciate the work that you're putting in on that.
I want to add to, we've had some great meetings. We continue to set up times to meet with our district court judges. They've been very receptive to getting the information, knowing what Mariel's up to, and just getting an update from Gabby about just the status of how dire things are. And I know that they're really keen on knowing that the resources are here and available. And Gabby, I did want to, the funding on that chart that you showed, that funding is just the funds. That's the funding that you've dispersed, the local dollars that you've dispersed, right? Would it be accurate to say that those numbers don't reflect some of the folks that you've helped apply for CARA funds?
I would say there's some overlap, and yeah, there is also people who I have engaged with to sign up for the CARE program too.
Okay.
Yeah, some of it we employed a strategy of, we help a household for a month or two and then also sign them up for the CARE program in hopes that enough time would be given to for the CARE program to process. It's been kind of weird because the CARE program requires that they not receive funding from other sources. So we've been able to try to accommodate that when we sign folks up or assist people in signing up, but it has been difficult to navigate that. I'm hoping they just give us the funding locally and then we can get it out quickly and avoid evictions and not have additional case managers to help fix a problem that I feel like you can avoid preemptively.
I do want to mention too that I've had some conversations with Jill, who's had conversations with this team, and then also with Commissioner Reed. I would really like us to try to find some time this fall to do a deeper dive into just the entire eviction process. And half, I think, of that would just be for public awareness. of just everything that's engaged in it. So we are looking to try to find a time on our calendars that we can make that happen in, hopefully in October. So that'll be another great opportunity just to go into some more additional detail on this.
Being a part of that call, sorry, one last thing. Being a part of that call, the national call, it seems like many communities had numbers on evictions, and I'm wondering where we can start getting that more publicly out to the public, that information out to the public.
Yeah, I have a planned call with the district court clerk for a separate matter. And this was when Gabby emailed me with this idea earlier this week or last week. I forget, Gabby. My meeting got pushed, but I had this on my list of things to ask the court clerk about. It seemed like a pretty easy ask.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will open this up for public comment. I don't think anyone's lasted with us here in the courthouse, but is there anyone online who would like to make public comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll bring this back for discussion with commissioners. Commissioners.
This is Commissioner Reed here. Thanks, Gabby, and thanks, Mayel. Thanks for staying up sort of late with us on a Wednesday evening. I appreciate you sticking around and appreciate all the work that you've been doing in this community for the past several months, past year, and the recent conversations to really be as responsive as possible to that eviction moratorium lapsing and going away as a protective layer to figure out all the avenues where we can try and affect some change. So I just want to acknowledge that I have seen you both doing that work in the community in a variety of spaces, and I really appreciate it. I know it's a lot of labor and it's a lot of saying the same things in multiple spaces. So I just want to acknowledge that and appreciate it. And thanks for such a thorough kind of synopsis of where you've been and where you're at. And I just want to, based on our previous conversations and conversations I've had with Jill and Sarah, this is a dire need to me. It's a really urgent gap to fill, essentially, given the totality of circumstances. And I think that it's a very smart, tangible use of some dollars right now, because even in the short amount of time the HSC has existed, you have a really solid, proven track record of effectively distributing that money, coming up with outreach options, reflecting and figuring out how to be more accessible, how to engage more community partners. And I just want to also highlight that the landlord engagement piece of it, especially in that idea of how we really need to bring those folks to the table in the conversation more and engage them in all of the work of eviction prevention and homelessness prevention and just community care. I think that these dollars, the HSC really in general is in such a good position to really leverage the money and the connections you've already started to build and just keep expanding on that. Because as a service provider in this community, I know how far connections and relationship building and conversations can go, and that sort of direct advocacy and engagement that can really only happen on a local level. That's not possible with a program like Kira, where everything is online and very strict and there's no real personal engagement. That's a deterrent for a lot of property owners and landlords. And we have service providers have seen that time and time again. So having an option that is localized, that provides a direct contact with somebody that can really engage in whatever the issues are, especially if maybe some issues exist along with non-payment of rent that can be addressed. I think that's a really smart coupling of ideas, I guess. And I think that the timing makes sense that, right now, obviously there's a dire need for the funds, but it also serves a purpose in sort of leveraging some opportunity to engage more community members that are not just experiencing crisis, but that have some piece of the solution in that, and that could work together and feel supported in that process. So I just really want to highlight that and applaud that strategy. I think it's a really smart strategy. And I think it's a holistic sort of vantage point to take. So I appreciate that. And I'm very supportive of this, and I'm really eager to hear how things go with the application to Kira also, about trying to localize more of those state dollars so that they can be more effectively distributed. Yep. If there's no further comments, I'll make a motion. I move to approve a request from the Douglas County Housing Stabilization Collaborative for $125,000 of one-time funding to support rent and utility assistance to Douglas County households and landlords with funding from the U.S. American Rescue Plan.
Second.
All of those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you both for the presentation, and we will move on to item 3.5. Corporation for Supportive Housing Needs Assessment.
Thanks, Commissioners. Bob Tryansky, our Director of Behavioral Health Projects, is moving into the panel to provide us a brief overview of this item that is deferred from last week. Based off just some additional contract language we needed to work out. Where's Bob? I'll turn it over to you, Bob.
Thanks, Commissioners. And Jill, we also want to bring in Kim Keaton from the Corporation for Supportive Housing, who's in the, thank you very much. And I want to turn my camera on. So
hi there.
I will tell.
You get.
We hear you and we
Great.
see you, Kim. Then they just hear me, which is just fine. So the hour is late, and I appreciate everyone staying with us so we can also talk to you about this issue. Just one quick thought as I was listening to the last conversation and the great work that Marielle and Gabby are doing. You know, it is Suicide Prevention Month. And so that just triggered a thought in my head as I was listening to the conversation. One of the things I've learned from my colleagues at Lawrence Douglas County Public Health and from KSPHQ is, you know, communities are a little further along in understanding what some of the consequences are of eviction. And I don't remember, because I don't have the study in front of me, whether it was Portland, Oregon or Seattle, Washington, but several years ago through a death review board, they took a look at the correlation between evictions and loss of life by suicide. And there was a direct correlation there. So as I listen to this conversation, you know, doing things like deploying case managers or behavioral health professionals who can be there with the sheriff's department when an eviction is being executed is something that other communities have tried and noticed that it has an impact. My point being, there are a lot of interventions that we can look at and explore in preventing suicide. And I'll transition from that to what we'd like to be able to do is to really understand what our community needs in order to be able to maintain tenure in the community, maintain stability in the community, regardless of the life circumstances that are challenging them to be fully vested in our community. The item we bring before you is an engagement with Corporation for Supportive Housing to conduct a focused study on and create for us a blueprint of the full continuum of needs that we have around supportive housing. The Behavioral Health Leadership Coalition, the Human Services Coalition, there's a conversation that's been going on now for several years, and we've taken several steps in making progress on increasing the portfolio of supportive housing options we have in the community. It's the thing that got us to move from the crisis center to a treatment and recovery campus with 3 tiers of housing. We've taken initiatives with Artists Helping the Homeless to do a better job of providing supportive housing for people who are coming out of reentry and men specifically who need safe and sober living choices. We've met with Friends of Recovery to talk about Oxford houses Friends of Recovery tells us, Douglas County really should have 12 Oxford houses. We have 5. So there's a broad spectrum of needs that we hear, and we need, I think, most of all, to stitch together a blueprint so that we have a comprehensive understanding of how do we have the supportive housing portfolio of types of housing that we need. And so Corporation for Supportive Housing has a good solid history of doing this type of work in communities, and we wanted to be able to move this piece of work along while CPPR was involved in kind of a broader study of how to understand our homeless needs more broadly and more generally. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim again, because the hour is late, and I think this is a fairly simple proposal to get the next piece of work in this spectrum of supportive housing done, which is to conduct a needs assessment and to come back from Corporation for Supportive Housing with some recommendations and a blueprint for what our considerations ought to be when we're trying to take advantage of the season of opportunity that's coming towards us with the ARPA funds to make some maybe even bigger steps forward on this work. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kim. Kim, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and take it from there.
Great. Thank you, Bob. As Bob said, my name is Kim Keaton. I'm with the Corporation for Supportive Housing. It's been really great to listen to the attention to housing instability, homelessness, and equity. Over the time of your meeting tonight, I've been able to listen in, and I really think this is Lawrence and Douglas County is the community that's really borrowing and learning from national best practices on how best to implement these funds and how to think about them as an investment in our communities. CSH stands for Corporation for Supportive Housing. We are a national leader on supportive housing. We are the national leader of supportive housing. We're a national nonprofit headquartered in New York. I happen to be located in Kansas City, Missouri, so not very far from y'all. And it sounds like everyone there is familiar with supportive housing, but as you probably know, it's deeply affordable subsidized housing paired with support services, usually targeted at most vulnerable and people and families in need in our communities. We're currently celebrating our 30th year of providing capital, expertise, information, and innovation to help communities create housing that helps people most in need thrive in their communities. About 3 years ago, we embarked on an effort to conduct a national supportive housing needs assessment across systems, basically to look at the whole country state by state and say, how much supportive housing do we really need? Because by only funding the homeless system to have some supportive housing, we are obviously not making the progress that we wanted to make. Why cross system? Well, over time, we've really come to know that people enter homelessness out of desperation, out of failure of other systems and systemic racism of other institutions. And that involvement in many of those systems, particularly child welfare and the justice system, jails and prisons, really make people more at risk of experiencing both short and long-term homelessness. In particular, our communities of color all across the country. And Kansas is no different than Missouri, than New York, than California, than any other place. The disparity is everywhere. So we did a national needs assessment, and then since then, we've worked with several counties and a few states to take the methodology and use local data, local situations, local resources, and conditions to create more localized needs across systems for what supportive housing might look like if we were to create it at scale, over a planned period of time with different types of mixes of interventions and different models of supportive housing for different household types, different populations. And so this work allows communities to really proactively plan and deploy resources strategically over time to the populations most in need or the populations that are a priority for them. I think you all have the proposal with you, so I'm not going to go greatly in detail there and willing to entertain any questions after this. But hearing everything that's going on in Douglas County today, I feel that this work will, really support the efforts to, particularly on the Built for Zero side of things, by really helping the community focus on the supply of supportive housing. I don't think that there is a real ability to build anything towards zero without building something that is on the other side of zero, right? And so I'm just going to close. I'm going to close with that. I think that, we're really focused on the long term and housing and services for the long term for people across populations in Douglas County. Open it up to questions.
Thank you. Do we have questions from commissioners? Okay, we will open it up to public comment. There's no one left with us in the courthouse today. Do we have anyone online who would like to make public comment on this item? Seeing no hands, we will bring it back to discussion from commissioners. Commissioners.
So we've been here for a while, and I don't want this Commissioner Kelly, I don't want our lack of questions to signal that we don't think that this is super important. I think this has there's such a need in our community for this, and understanding that if we're going to meet our aspirations when it comes to homelessness, this is really a place we have to target. We talked earlier about data-informed decisions when it comes to using ARPA funds, and I'm very supportive of this because in my time as a commissioner, when I started, I'm not sure I knew much about supportive housing at all, and Bob has been very helpful in helping me understand how critical that is. And so I'm very supportive of it and appreciate the work, Bob, that you're constantly doing to advocate for this. And Kim, glad to have you on board.
Thank you.
This is Commissioner Reed. I would just add that I do think this complements the review that KU's public. I'm not gonna. Thank you. See
CPBR.
CPBR. It's acronym soup in my brain at some point. I think the two complement each other a lot, and so I'm really looking forward to the finer tuned focus on supportive housing that the county has had such investment in, and that I know this that us as a commission is committed to standing. So thanks for hanging out with us all evening, Kim, and listening to the rest of our meeting also.
Thank you.
Commissioners, I wanted to offer as well that we know that from our partners with the city of Lawrence that administer a huge chunk of the federal dollars and have the exclusive eligibility to apply for a huge chunk of HUD dollars, that having a needs assessment is clearly being articulated in the requirements to apply for additional HUD ARP funds. And so our partners at the city are paying attention to that, and we're working really closely with us on this project, but also with the KUC PPR. So this work, we need to do this work. I know it's going to take time, but it's time well spent. And as you heard from Shannon Oury, we're still trying to be ready when the funds are available.
Well, and just one piece, just for everybody's clarity. Kim and Corporation for Supportive Housing will be working with a supportive housing work group, which we are standing up. And this will kind of be the first task that group will be engaged in, exercising leadership on behalf of the community. So to go back to our conversations last week, we will be very intentional about having consumers and folks with direct lived experience with homelessness engaged with that group and through that process. And we will be very intentional about making sure that the lived experience, voice, multiple perspectives on that lens are present through this process. But I'm excited that this gives that group a focus and a scope and a first task, which can continue to sort of gel these myriad of stakeholders together for a common purpose.
Thank you, Bob. I'm happy to make a motion, commissioners, to approve the contract with with Corporation for Supportive Housing to conduct a supportive housing needs assessment in Douglas County at a cost not to exceed $26,000.
I'll go ahead and second that and bring it to a vote. All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you both for sticking with us and for the great presentation. We're excited to see the work that comes out of this.
Thank you so much.
And with that, we'll move on to appointments. Sarah, I know that you sent us all an email to make sure that we had an appointment moved up to the top of our list.
Yes, Commissioners, Chris Maley has come forward and to be nominated to the Willow
Fire District.
Yep, Fire District, Palmyra Fire District 2. I was gonna say Wellspring. And if you want more time, we can certainly take it, but if you're ready to make a motion, we can get that appointment made.
Sorry, I had his name pulled up. There it is. It's Commissioner Reed here. I move to appoint Chris Malley to the Palmyra Fire District number 2.
Second.
All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I believe those are all of the appointments we have to consider for this evening. We will move on to miscellaneous. What do you have for us, Sarah?
Thank you, Commissioners. There is a memo in your packet. I do want to highlight, I won't read it for you but there is a lot of good information coming up here on some important dates and some great things happening in our community. So please take a look at that, specifically the Behavioral Health Prevention Summit. That's going to happen over lunch hours. So I think it's a really great opportunity to engage folks maybe that might not have the time to dedicate a whole day. So please check out that link. Also, so next week we start back up with work sessions. So we will have a 4 o'clock next week on the Downtown Space Needs Master Plan. And then I put the schedule for the next couple of weeks in there. We do pretty much have work sessions scheduled through the most of October. But I do want to point out that we are not meeting on October 6th. We will have staff out of town for a conference. And then I'm too excited and I know it's late, but I want to say something really quick and important because it's going to be on the consent agenda next week. But as of yesterday, we've received payment for the May 2019 tornado from FEMA. We finally got our check from FEMA for the May 2019 tornado. We received $523,328.07 to reimburse our costs associated with that. So you will have a consent item next week to just acknowledge the receipt of those funds, but it is too awesome to not share the news as soon as I can. So that's all I have, Commissioners. Thank you.
That's awesome.
That's fantastic. I was just thinking about that earlier in the meeting when we were talking about federal funds taking forever it's not quite the same, but boy, wow.
I know it is late. I just wanted to update fellow commissioners on a couple of things. We had a great CJCC meeting yesterday. And there were some really wonderful dashboards that were updated and revealed. And one of the coolest things that I have ever seen is that our sheriff has made one of the dashboards downloadable. I mean, you actually email and they send you an Excel file, but we're actually sharing the data so folks can use it for research and it makes it really accessible. And I am just so proud of what our community is doing when it comes to transparency and being much more cooperative with data. So big shout out to Matt Cravens and to the Sheriff's Office. And I know the District Attorney is currently working on a dashboard as well, but it's just sharing a lot more information with our community. And I'm incredibly thankful for all the work that goes into all of those things and all the work that comes up with that. So it was also Mike Bauer's last CJCC meeting with us because he is moving on to Johnson County. So just want to say I'm very thankful for all of the work that he has done with our community. And I'm excited to keep this going and build on the foundation that he's provided. So we have a really great job listing up and hopefully we'll have some good candidates to bring in for that replacement.
I don't have anything to add.
Same.
All right, then we are adjourned. Thank you.